During World War II, close to 40,000 German sailors served aboard U-boats, but only about 6,000 lived to see the war's end. The rest vanished into the cold, dark depths of the Atlantic Ocean. Some were crushed under immense water pressure. Some drowned after their vessels were destroyed. Some burned inside their steel tombs, and others were left drifting in silence, never to be found. These submarines were designed to hunt Allied ships, but in reality, the hunters often became the hunted. For the men inside, life was a constant battle against fear, exhaustion, and the deadly environment around them. Every mission was a gamble. Every dive a roll of the dice that could end with the crew trapped beneath tons of water. The question that lingers is how such a feared naval force could also become one of the most doomed in history. The answer lies deep beneath the waves. Inside the steel corridors, smelling of oil and sweat, along the dripping pipes that leaked seawater, and in the crushing weight of the ocean that could tear a submarine apart in seconds. This is the story of why over 9 out of every 10 U-boat sailors never came home. Germany's fascination with fighting beneath the sea began long before the Second World War, even before the first great global conflict. German inventors and military thinkers were imagining a new kind of warfare, one where battles were fought in silence under the waves. The early attempts, however, were crude and dangerous. In 1850, an engineer named Wilhelm Bauer designed a submarine that he believed would change the future of naval warfare. His creation was little more than a dream, brought to life with limited technology. On its very first test, it sank almost immediately. Bauer and his small crew narrowly escaped with their lives, and while the vessel was a failure, the idea of underwater combat never went away. It simply waited, like a seed, for the right moment to grow. In the early 20th century, that moment arrived. Germany began building real submarines, not for peaceful exploration, but to challenge the naval power of its rivals. The Royal Navy of Britain ruled the surface of the seas, and a direct challenge with battleships would have been hopeless for Germany. Instead, the Germans looked below the surface. If they could not win above the waves, they would strike from beneath them. By the outbreak of World War I, they had 28 U-boats ready to be deployed. These early models were far from perfect. They were noisy machines, slow in movement, and unsteady in rough waters. Most of the time, they sailed on the surface, diving only when they needed to attack or avoid detection. They ran on diesel engines above water, which charged batteries to power weak electric motors when submerged. This gave them limited stealth, and only a small window to strike before they had to return to the surface. Even with these flaws, the U-boats quickly proved their worth. In September 1914, the German submarine U-9 achieved something that shocked the world. It sank 3 British cruisers in less than an hour, killing over 1,400 sailors. The attack forced naval commanders everywhere to rethink their strategies. The rules of naval warfare had changed forever. Now, a ship could be destroyed without warning, and the attacker could disappear into the ocean before anyone could respond. At first, German crews followed old-fashioned prize rules. They would surface, signal a merchant vessel to stop, allow its crew to escape in lifeboats, and then sink the ship. But this code of honor did not last long. The British began arming merchant vessels and disguising them as ordinary cargo ships, calling them coup ships. These floating traps would lure U-boats in close, then reveal hidden guns and blast them apart. Once this happened, the Germans abandoned any sense of fairness. Civilian ships, hospital vessels, and any other target became fair game. Unrestricted submarine warfare was born, and it was ruthless. During World War I, Germany's U-boats sank more than 5,000 ships, leaving behind a trail of wreckage and fear. When the war ended, the Allies sought to prevent another submarine campaign by banning Germany from owning or building submarines altogether. This ban was written into the Treaty of Versailles in 1919. But laws on paper could not erase the knowledge and ambition that the Germans already possessed. In secret, they continued their work. They set up design offices in neutral countries and pretended to build submarines for foreign navies. In truth, they were refining their technology, testing new designs, and quietly preparing for the day they would return to the sea. When Adolf Hitler rose to power in the 1930s, there was no longer a need for secrecy. Germany openly defied the treaty and began rearming its military on every front. Army, Air Force, and Navy. Submarines became a central part of this expansion. By 1935, the U-boat fleet had been rebuilt from scratch. This time, it was not just about building submarines, it was about creating a new way to wage war at sea. Admiral Karl Dönitz brought a new vision. Instead of single submarines hunting lone targets, he imagined groups of them working together, like a pack of wolves hunting prey. These wolf packs would circle Allied convoys, coordinate their strikes, and overwhelm enemy defenses. It was a strategy designed to turn the Atlantic Ocean into a battlefield where no ship was safe. When World War II began in 1939, Germany wasted no time. On the very first day of Britain's involvement, a German U-boat torpedoed the SS Athene, a civilian passenger liner. More than 100 people were killed. The Germans claimed it was an accident, but the message was clear: no ship, military or civilian, was beyond their reach. This war at sea would be total, with no distinction between combatants and innocents. The backbone of Germany's new campaign was the Type 7 U-boat. Sleek and deadly, it was far more advanced than the fragile models of the previous war. At over 220 feet in length, it could travel nearly 9,000 nautical miles without refueling. Its maximum test depth was about 750 feet, deeper than most Allied depth charges could reach in practice. However, most crews stayed between 300 and 500 feet to avoid pushing the limits of the hull. Even so, these depths were dangerous. One wrong move or one serious hit could collapse the submarine structure and kill everyone aboard. The U-boats were not built to fight enemy warships head-on. Their mission was far more strategic: cut off Britain's lifeline of supplies. Every cargo ship, every oil tanker, every troop transport was a target. Each attack was part of a larger plan to choke Britain into submission without a single German soldier needing to set foot on its shores. It was a war of patience, stealth, and constant danger, where every success carried the risk of becoming the next wreck lying silent on the ocean floor. Dinnitz's Wolfpack plan made the U-boat threat far deadlier. Instead of each submarine working alone, several would coordinate attacks over huge areas of the ocean. They would hide during the day, keeping their distance while following convoys, then close in under darkness to strike from several directions at once. This made it nearly impossible for the escorts to protect every ship. The defenders were outnumbered, surrounded, and forced into confusion. Convoys, which were meant to keep ships safe, now looked more like clusters of prey, surrounded by predators. One well-placed torpedo didn't just sink a ship, it destroyed thousands of tons of vital cargo, drowned soldiers, and robbed the Allies of resources they desperately needed. If the victim was a troopship or a fuel tanker, the impact could delay or derail entire military operations. The German U-boats were not just dangerous, they seemed to be everywhere. The Atlantic became a deadly trap without any mines, only silent hunters waiting for the right moment. The Allies had little time to adjust. In the early stages of World War II, the U-boat war intensified quickly, and so did the list of targets. At first, the campaign was meant to damage enemy supply lines, but soon, the line between combatant and civilian all but disappeared. On September 3, 1939, the passenger ship SS Athenia was torpedoed without warning by U-30. Over 100 civilians were killed, including women and children. The Germans claimed it was an accident, but to the rest of the world, it was a chilling sign that old rules no longer applied. In theory, submarine captains were still supposed to follow rules similar to those from World War I, warning merchant ships before attacking so their crews could evacuate. But this became almost impossible once Britain began disguising armed Q ships as harmless cargo vessels. From a submarine's periscope, there was no way to tell the difference until it was too late. This ended any thought of mercy. U-boats stopped surfacing to give warnings, and civilian ships became acceptable targets. Vessels carrying food, fuel, or even mail were destroyed without hesitation. If a ship was headed for Britain, it was considered part of the war effort and marked for sinking. The Atlantic, once a busy route for trade and travel, turned into a graveyard. Sometimes, submarines would fire on lifeboats or leave survivors drifting for days, not out of cruelty, but because helping them would reveal the submarine's position. Cold logic took the place of compassion. In this kind of warfare, the sinking of a single cargo ship was more than a tactical win, it was a weapon aimed at breaking Britain's economy and morale. Each ton of supplies lost tightened the pressure. On the island nation, these attacks were meant to destroy not only ships but also the will to keep fighting. What made U-boats even more frightening was how they struck. The torpedo was not just an explosive, it was a silent mechanical hunter. Each U-boat carried around 14 torpedoes, though only a few could be fired at once. Accuracy mattered because every shot was precious. There were no computers to do the math. Crews calculated the target's course, speed, and distance by hand. The main German torpedoes were the G7A, powered by steam and fast, but leaving a visible white trail, and the G7E, slower but electrically powered and nearly invisible in the water. Early models often malfunctioned. Some strayed off target, some failed to explode, and a few even turned back toward the submarine that had launched them. When a torpedo worked properly, the results were devastating. A hit could flood a ship's compartments within seconds, snapping its hull apart. Many Allied ships carried fuel, ammunition, or explosives, leading to secondary blasts that sent fire and debris into the air. Lifeboats were ripped from their supports or destroyed by flames. Rescue was often impossible. There were no nearby ports, and help might take days to arrive, if it came at all. Many ships vanished without anyone knowing they had been sunk. Survivors floated in icy water, clinging to wreckage or rafts, facing death from exposure, thirst, or even sharks. Some were eventually picked up. Many were never seen again. Inside the submarine, the crew would listen to the sinking ship through sonar, hearing its final creaks and groans fade into silence. If no escorts were nearby, they would move on to find the next target. If enemy ships responded, they would dive quickly to avoid detection. For the Allies, these attacks were terrifying and costly. For the Germans, they were efficient and effective. Each strike sent a message across the ocean nowhere was safe. By late 1942, the U-boat's dominance was beginning to fade. The once unseen and untouchable hunters were being destroyed in growing numbers as the Allies developed better technology. In tactics, new sonar equipment could detect submarines underwater by sound alone. Aircraft equipped with radar could scan wide stretches of the ocean and spot even a periscope. Depth charges became more accurate, and hunter-killer groups were formed to track and destroy submarines. Escort carriers provided air protection for convoys, and long-range bombers like the B-24 Liberator could now patrol parts of the ocean that had been unreachable before. Then came May 1943, later remembered as Black May. In just 1 month, Germany lost 43 U-boats, nearly one every day, along with almost 2,000 trained crew members. In less than 4 weeks, the hunters had become the hunted, and the tide of the battle in the Atlantic began to turn. It wasn't one massive battle that caused the downfall, but rather a series of small, constant blows. Each new escort ship, every improved device to detect torpedoes, and every plane spotting a submarine's trail from the sky chipped away at Germany's U-boat advantage. The German Navy knew it, and Admiral Karl Dönitz, now in charge of the entire fleet, had to withdraw many submarines just to stop a complete disaster. The Atlantic was no longer a hunting ground. It had turned into a graveyard. This change didn't just affect the mission. It changed how the crews thought. U-boat sailors now set out knowing they might never see a target before being attacked, and that a convoy could be bait instead of prey. Every dive could be their last. Every rumble from a depth charge might mean the hull was breaking apart. Every sonar ping was like a clock counting down. The ocean, once seen as a place for victory, now felt like a coffin waiting to close. To understand why so many U-boat crews died, it's not enough to look at the dangers outside the submarine. You have to see the nightmare inside it. Life on a German U-boat was like slow decay inside a steel prison. Around 45 to 60 men were crammed into a narrow tube with barely enough space to stand. Sleeping quarters were so tight that sailors had to share bunks in shifts, lying in beds, still damp from another man's sweat. Some used rolled-up uniforms instead of pillows. Missions were meant to last 6 to 8 weeks, but often dragged on for 3 months. That meant being sealed away from sunlight, fresh air, and freedom for weeks on end. Oxygen would start dropping within hours of diving, replaced by a mix of diesel fumes, sweat, mildew, and body odor. Early U-boats didn't have advanced systems to clean the air, so after 2 days underwater, headaches became constant, breathing got harder, and dizziness or even hallucinations set in. Fresh food ran out within days. At first there was bread and fruit, but soon it was canned meat, hard biscuits, and whatever hadn't spoiled in the damp air. Water was rationed to about 2 gallons per person per day for everything drinking, cooking, and washing. Most crew members never bathed at all during patrols. Dampness led to skin infections, rashes, ulcers, and fungal growth, the men called rot. Their feet became raw from standing in sweat and grease for weeks. Silence was a matter of survival. A single dropped tool or loud cough could give away their position to enemy sonar. Privacy didn't exist. Toilets were buckets placed near where others ate and slept. If someone died, his body was kept in the torpedo room's cool storage until it began to decay. Above all was the constant knowledge that any dive might be their last. The most dreaded sound was the metallic echo of sonar hitting the hull. It meant they'd been found. What followed was usually depth charges, metal drums packed with explosives set to go off at certain depths. A single one could disable a sub, several could rip it apart. Explosions shook the water, lights flickered, pipes bent, bolts snapped, and if the hull broke, the crushing pressure outside would implode the sub instantly. Death could be sudden and silent, but not all deaths were quick. Sometimes the sub survived just enough to sink to the seabed. Engines might fail, batteries die, and the crew would be left in pitch black, cold as water slowly rose. In some cases, the air simply ran out, and men slipped into unconsciousness. In others, they climbed into smaller compartments hoping to blow the ballast tanks in time. Fires were another deadly threat. Battery leaks could release poisonous chlorine gas, and any spark could set off a chain reaction in a vessel full of fuel and explosives. In emergencies, compartments were sealed to contain damage, but the doors locked both ways. Anyone on the wrong side was trapped, left behind while the others listened. The ocean didn't need bullets to kill it, could crush, suffocate, burn, or poison you. Many sailors called their missions death voyages. The danger wasn't always from enemy ships or planes, it often came from the submarine itself. By the end of the war, the numbers were devastating. Of about 40,000 men who served on German U-boats, more than 30,000 never came back. That's a loss rate of around 75%, the highest of any German military force. Some estimates push it closer to 91% when including training accidents, mechanical failures, and the desperate final months when barely trained teenagers were sent on near-suicidal missions. Most were between 18 and 24 years old. Many died before they even saw combat. The price they paid wasn't only physical, it was mental. Survivors returned, changed. Some never stepping on a ship again, others unable to sleep without hearing the groan of metal or imagining water closing in. The U-boat campaign sank more than 2,700 Allied ships, disrupted supply lines, delayed invasions, and littered the Atlantic with wreckage. But the cost was unimaginable. No medal, parade, or song could make up for it. Most of the submarines remain on the seabed, their crews still inside, remembered only by the sea. These men spent their last moments in fear, darkness, and silence. Their story was not one of glory but of tragedy, a mission that began as a strategic gamble and ended in horror. Even in war, where numbers and victories often dominate the story, the fate of the U-boat crews is a reminder that behind every statistic was a face, a voice, and a life cut short. These men lived and died in steel coffins, far from home, with no grave but the deep. Their mission failed, but their suffering and sacrifice tell a deeper truth. That war is never just about battles and strategy. It is about people, and the sea still holds their memories, silent and endless, long after the echoes of depth charges have faded. Asterisk.